I invite Brahmacharini Purvi Chaitanya for her talk and for 15 minutes.
Samasta Janakalyane Niratam Karunamayam Namami Chinmayam Devam Sadgurum Brahma Vidvaram Sarva Vedanta Siddhanta Gatitam Nirmalam Shivam Sadacharam Pravakshyami Yoginam Jnana Siddhaye. Salutations unto the lotus feet of Pujya Gurudev, all the acharyas, chairperson, and all the thinkers of the society who have gathered here. Today I would like to explain the details of the paper that was presented to you the other day. There was half part left, so I thank Jhaji and Talwaji for giving me a chance to complete this aspect. I hold a position where I go and interact with children. As you know, we have already heard Talwaji. It is practicality which we are sharing here. Practically what is happening, we are sharing. So what is happening is when we go and talk to children and teachers in educational institutions to implement spiritual values, the first thing is why. Why we should implement it? So instead of that, instead of they coming up with such a question, I have changed my pattern with accordance and I go and ask them, what are the problems you are having while you are educating yourself? Because education is ultimately from known to unknown. So I want to know what are their problems, and then it becomes easy for me to help them out of the situation. It is also quoted by Swami Vivekananda ji, if a person is really hungry, you can't give that person Vedanta. You should give him first food and then you later talk to him about the spiritual values. But first, that what is the problems they are having in their mind is not solved, then such great spiritual values to be implemented will not fructify. So this is where I start. This is how I am working now as the Chinmaya Vision Coordinator in Andhra Pradesh. So we start with asking questions from the children or the teachers. What are the problems prevailing while the teachers are educating or while the children are learning? And the problem which is major is memory. Either they are unable to grasp these concepts which have been given to them through education, or they are unable to present them in the examination format. So both these, keeping in view, the suggestion which has been given is what I am going to share with you. Primarily, we have to understand the memory system of human being. And since I come from a background with computers, I say it is related to or it is equivalent to computer memory, wherein you have a hardware memory. And as I asked you on the first day also, what is the limit of memory? Is it like finite like our computer? No, it is infinite. And now the process of activation is what has been told in the Upanayana Samskara, which is again Gayatri Mantra. And most of us misunderstand this Gayatri Mantra aspect of it to be initiation process of learning Vedic literature alone. There are schools who think that this is only a process to only attain Vedic knowledge, not for the education system prevailing today. So I request them, why don't you experiment with this? And I have given it to 4 or 5 institutions which have taken up this practice and they have applied it also. And so while doing, they do the Gayatri Mantra, but with an understanding of the mantra. Swami Chinmayanand ji always emphasized that whatever you're doing, you should do it by knowing what it is. Without knowing, you just say, it does not have that effect on you. So we are teaching them why we have to do and what it will lead to. As Sir rightly said, the pranayama technique is already involved in Sandhya Vandan, Agamarshana. So it's already involved there. So when you do that, it has an effect. The child will get the ability to understand, the grasping power. So I openly challenged many groups that why don't you do it yourself, for you to experience. Because what ultimately is the memory is what remains with you. So there are 3 levels. First is buffer system. I'm talking in computer language. So first is buffer, and then there is temporary memory, and then there is permanent memory. If you have observed in the history of computers also, there was disk operating system, which was previous to this Windows operating system which has come now. The disk operating system, it was very slow compared to what we are doing now, multitasking. So what was happening then with the memory of that operating system and what is happening now with the operating system? Very simple is, at that time, when you say save a file, it will go and throw it somewhere. And when you say you want that file again it will all check all the data and then retrieve it. And that's why it was comparatively slow. And what has happened with the latest computer technology is they have what is called as memory registers or tag system. So now it is faster. The retrieval is faster. It is rightly said that if you are really connected with the totality, whatever understanding, there is no problem. But the problem is we are not connected. So for children who are not connected and who think spiritual values are at the end of the life or these are not really important for education, we have to make them understand how important are these aspects. For example, all the negative aspects of a personality, anger, bore, worry, irritation, it has an effect on memory. For example, all of us have experienced this. Before we have gone for an examination in the school, let us say I got tensed. In the exam, I have prepared very well. I have understood the concepts very well. But at the time of a performance of the exam, I failed to give the result. But after the exam is over, I remember everything. We become wise after the examination is over. How? Why is this happening? How is it happening? Children always ask why and how. So how to come out of it? So I always say, please observe yourself. What is happening within you? So the activation of the memory, as we have to see, the education today is only catering to buffer system, where the information is given, nothing is connected to the child. The child doesn't own that knowledge also. And that's why they are unable to gain that ultimate knowledge also, which actually all the knowledges should lead to that ultimatum. They are not able to reach. There is no transformation of the personality because they are not touching the core of the personality. So I request all of you also to experiment this practically. The Sandhya Vandana, the Gayatri Japa which is been prescribed, and we are today in the place where Adi Shankaracharya ji had believed historically, when I came to know here, that he was given this Upanayana Samskara of Sri Adi Shankaracharya ji was done here. So I am very lucky that I am again presenting you this practice which is important for students. So we have to see the buffer system is where now the information is going. And we had a session, all our Chinmaya Vidyalayas yesterday you have seen. We have regular upgradation programs. In that, Shraddhalu Ranadi, he said, give the time for the child to transform that information into wisdom. What is happening is overwriting of the memory. By the time you have from morning 9 to say, let us say 3 o'clock sessions, 45 minutes sessions for the children, what is happening? Every class overwrites maths class, then it is physics, it's chemistry. So physics overwrites maths, chemistry overwrites. So ultimately at the end of the day, the child does not own anything. What does he remember? What does he retain? What should be useful? All these aspects which are useful for the transformation are really not available with him because already overwriting has taken place. So he says, please give the child to process the data. So after every class, as sir rightly said, make them sit down and just 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, let them process that data. Let them own it up. Because though we say that, I and mine is not important in spiritual level, but that is what activates the memory. For example, all of you will vouch for this, that when I say someone is talking about someone, will you remember this after tomorrow? No, it is not available. But someone said something about you. They said like this, you will never forget for your life because it is me and mine. So memory works, or the permanent memory, whatever is there, is connected to me and mine. So this knowledge, when I say it is connected to me, it is mine, then it is owned up by the child. It goes into the permanent memory. This is what is the difference between prajnana and jnana. We have what is called as prajnana. We use this terminology, prajnana and jnana. But what is prajnana is anubhava jnana prajnana. So whatever you have experienced, you have collected some information, but you should have undergone the experience process, then it becomes prajnana, which is permanent. It stays with you throughout your life. You cannot forget it. So please understand, today our education system, we have to provide, we have to start. As I said, this is not the end, but these are the ways in which if you take the children, ultimately they should reach that divine personality within them. But we have to cater to the present day problem. And we have to connect to them with the help of the available neurophysicists and other sciences also. Relate with them and make them experimental. We should make them experience it. We tell them and they're like, Acha, Mataji has said, okay, what you said is very nice. Mataji, very nice. No. Let them experience it so that there is real transformation. So my only request to this forum is, let all our methods that we adopt be more experimentative, experiential oriented than mere theories. And then the result is bound to happen. As Sir rightly said with his education where he is doing no mark system and all that. No, you don't judge the child. If it could be really done that way, real transformation we have seen. I got the chance to do this with 100 children. There is a Chinmaya Vidya, that's an orphanage, and 100 girls. We implemented the regular school system and all, but they failed. Then I said, I want to put the pass mark. What is the pass mark for all our educational system, sciences, to know the child has learnt or not? 40. And what I said is, no, we will have 95. People just, they said, Mataji, you're unethical. What are you doing? How can you be like this? I said, no, please. If we don't expect perfection from our children, the total knowledge, if we don't allow them to become totally equipped, then what will happen is the problems. And one of the key reasons for corruption is no knowledge. You may think about this, but I want you to think about it.
Wrap up.
Yeah, this is conclusion. So please think about this. We say few things, corruption and all that, but the key to all this is, if the child is not equipped with full knowledge, that is when it starts. The corruption aspect starts from there. So don't allow the children to go into this track, but rather let them understand that they have the ability to gain the knowledge, retain the knowledge, and experience something more, provided they are, what the problem they are having in hand, if it is solved first, then they will aspire for the universal aspects. And all these aspects are covered in the Sandhya Vandanam that is being told. So I have just mentioned all this so that we understand these are very important for our day-to-day practices. And the next generation will anyhow come to know it. Because all of us are working and there are so many institutions who are doing wonderful work. So eventually they will come to know it, that these are the practical methods. So let us use them to make it, give them in the way it has to be given, through the education system. Because ultimately, every child thinks the authority is the education system, not the other institutions. Is it true or not? We have seen, when we are parents, we are ourselves teachers, but our child will say, no, my teacher said this way, I will do it that way. So we hold a really great responsibility. Let us cater to this responsibility with the holistic knowledge and holistic spirituality. Thank you, sir, for giving me this opportunity. Hari Om.
Now I invite the next speaker, Professor K.S. Kannan from Karnataka Sanskrit University. He will speak on Veerashaivism.
Namasadase, Namasadasasapataye. Respected Ranaji, Director of the Institute, Professor Mallepuram Venkatesh, Vice Chancellor of Professor V.N. Jha, the spirit behind this entire seminar, Professor Unni, there are many other leading scholars here. There is Professor Pasala Giravani, Professor Varkhedi, many others here. I stand before you to give a talk on Veerashaivism and its contribution to the feeling of universality I've been asked to speak on this, and I must begin with an apology, as did Professor A.V. Nagasampike did yesterday, that I don't belong to this tradition, and I have been called upon to speak on this, and what little information that I could gather about this and what best I could make out of that, I'd like to present before you. I would be very much benefited by my interaction with you. I will start with the one common pursuit of all humankind. What's it that we all always try to do? There is but one and only thing that we constantly do. It is as though our brain is programmed to attain something. And that is nothing but the pursuit of happiness. And it is not merely human beings that have this drive. All creatures in the world constantly endeavor to attain this, says a famous Ayurvedic text, Ashtanga Hridaya. It says, Sukhartha sarvabhutanam mata sarva pravrittayaha sukhancha navina dharma tasma dharmaparo bhavet. So every effort of every individual, of every creature for that matter, is towards the attainment of happiness. The question then is, how do we define happiness? So there, once we define the goal, our means can also get defined and properly oriented. I have often dwelt on this theme of what is called the common formula of all Puranas. And what's that? The Asuras, see, some Asura performs tapas, God appears before him, grants him some boon, then the Asura becomes a Loka Kantaka, a tormentor and torturer of the world, then the God descends and he is killed. You find various allotropic forms of this single theme in all the Puranas. Why should all the Puranas give this same story, this very structure, again and again, over and over? The point is this. The very conception of happiness is the driving force, the motivating force here in the case of the Asuras performing their long tapas. They undergo various hardships and ultimately, what's it that they ask for? Almost invariably, every Asura has asked for but one boon, namely, I don't want to die. So they want to become immortal, even physically. We know even from biology that physical immortality is not possible. So we are all born with some cells, and within a matter of a few days, none of the cells that we had at the moment of origin of our birth, none of them do we have now, continue to have now. So all the cells in our body have been replaced. So in a matter of a week, all cells get displaced. So old cells die and new cells are born. And thus we have a continuous and constant change in our own being. And yet our identity remains the same. And it's only when the regeneration of cells starts deteriorating that we become old and eventually die. Now, the Lord invariably has to say to the Asura, well, even when I descend, even when the Lord descends, he himself cannot be here physically, permanently. So he too has apparently a date of birth and a date of death, so a date of departure. He too must have, and therefore it's not possible. And therefore the Asuras think of the next best solution. How is it that I can outwit everybody, even God, and live here permanently? And so they try to cancel out all sources of fear of death for them. So one Asura is very intelligent. He says, I don't want to die in the morning, neither during daytime, neither during night time. So he thinks that there is no point where, it is neither day nor night, and therefore he can live forever, neither inside nor outside. You know the story of Narasimha Avatara. God grants those boons. Okay, any boon that is asked for, God grants. Okay, except immortality, physical immortality. We are all born immortal, so there is no question of getting immortality afresh. So we are all immortal, but it's only when our conception of happiness is defined by a physical immortality that is totally denied, and God says that does not obtain in this scheme of things, and therefore even if I am born, I also have a date of departure, and this is not possible. Another asura thinks, if I get this power of burning anybody, but merely placing my hand on his head, okay, then I can become immortal. And therefore, you know the story of Bhasmasura, so who tries to chase the very giver of that boon. And therefore, in every one of these cases, we find that the asura has equated happiness with a physical immortality. Okay, so this is their definition of happiness. So we have in the Upanishads a wonderful subsidiary Upanishad called Osseri Upanishad. So in which a particular disciple asks for physical immortality. So he goes and looks into his reflection in the well, and he thinks that that is me, and therefore this itself is me. So he thinks he has got his Atma Jnana, and therefore self-realization, and therefore so he thinks that if the body is well fed and well taken care of, there is nothing more to seek in life, and therefore this is the conception of happiness. Now, scientists also analyze that the brain is of every creature is so programmed as to seek, number one, so immortality or continuity of survival. So survival is the essential program, and it's not merely survival. There is a program number 2 also, subsidiary to this, and it was also hinted upon by the first speaker. So, and that is, as long as you would like to do well, okay, you should feel energetic, you should feel youthful, okay. So the entire yogic exercise drives you towards a maintenance of our bodily vigor and youth, and therefore that is goal number 2. And even there we have certain limitations. Once again, this cannot be permanent. So continuity of survival and being youthful, so these are constant natural instincts of everyone, and it is depending upon the way we define our happiness and the goal of life that we define our own ways and means of living, and our own philosophy is built upon that. In the Bhagavad-Gita, there is a very clear statement that there can be no peace for a person who is constantly agitated. Ashantasya kutas sukham, says the Bhagavad-Gita. Yesterday, Professor Nagasampige hinted upon this verse which is there, which appears in my paper. Also, the common aim of all the Shastras is the attainment of this mental situation of poise, equipoise. So that Shanti is what is described. Sometimes the state of mind of the yogin is described as a nistaranga mahodadhi. So it's a vast ocean wherein there is no wave at all. Every mental vritti is a sort of a wave, and where this state of quietus is attained, where none of the mental vrittis arises in the mind. That is the state of quiescence. So all the Shastras have this aim. Shamartham sarva shastrani vihitani manishibhi sa eva sarva shastrajnaha yasya shantam manasada. The person who has attained that equanimity and tranquility of mind is the person who can be said to have attained Shama, which is the very goal of all the Shastras. So the various darshanas have propounded systems of living wherein this goal can be attained. The 6 darshanas that have been listed are Kranadasya, Akshapadasya, Vyasasya, Kapilasya cha, Patanjalair, Jaimineshcha, Darshanani Shadevahi. So these are the famous 6 schools of Indian philosophy. Sometimes even the Bhakti schools, so in fact the Virashaiva system belongs to one such school, they are also listed as 6 in number. So they are also sometimes designated darshanas. So they are shown as Shaivancha, Vaishnavam, Shaktam, Sauram, Vainayakam, Tatha, Skandancha, Bhakti Margasya, Darshanani Shadevahi. We have the Shaiva path, the Vaishnava, the Shakta path, the Saura, those who worship the sun, and Vainayaka, so those who worship Vinayaka, Skanda, the Kaumara school, Bhakti Margasya Darshanani Shadevahi. These are the 6 schools of thought. And there are, of course, these are the main ones. There are many among them, so which are their subsidiaries and subsets. For example, even in the Shaiva tradition, it is said there are 4 schools. Samanya Shaivam Prathamam, Mishra Shaivam Tatahparam, Shuddham Shaivam Tatognyayam, Veera Shaivam Tatahparam. So we have 4 schools of thought, namely Samanya Shaiva, Mishra Shaiva, Shuddha Shaiva, and Veera Shaiva. This quotation comes from Sukshmagama, quoted by Professor T.N. Mallappa. Now, there are also the Avaidika Darshanas, namely Charvaka, Bauddha, and Jaina. All these also have the common goal of making man attain mental peace, and it is towards that end that these have been devised and designed. Now, the credit goes to Dr. Ananda Kumar Swami to show that there is no real conflict among the various darshanas. So he says, just as botany and mathematics provide totally different perspectives to reality, and yet the two are not in conflict with each other, even so the 6 darshanas are not really in conflict with each other, and they only provide different perspectives, and that is the way to understand them. Of course, even in our own country, it was shown that the 6 darshanas and the various bhakti margas, they are all diverse ways of approaching the same supreme reality, and the choice of one or the other depends upon the nature of one's own constitution, the prakriti, and also one's own taste, ruchi. Says Pushpadanta in his Shiva Mahimna Stotra, Trayi Sankhya Yoga Pashupati Matam Vaishnavimati Prabhinne Prasthane Padamidamadah Pathyamiticha Ruchinam Vaichitrya Rijikutila Nana Pathajusham Nranam Eko Gamyas Tamasi Vayasam Arnavaiva. So Ruchi Vaichitrya and Prakriti Vaichitrya are the causes for the diversity. So this way, the variety of the darshanas itself is a significant aspect of the Indian approach to life. It's not that there can be one single uniform that can fit everyone on earth, and therefore we are all in different stages of evolution, and therefore we all need different methods to approach the supreme reality. And as we are all made of different constitutions, our own prakriti having varied combination of sattva, rajas and tamas, different methods are required for different kinds of aspirants. And this is also shown at a merely social level also, that all these systems can live in harmony. He is brought out by an inscription of Karnataka which says, Yam Shaiva Samupasate Shiva iti Brahmeti Vedantino Bauddha Buddha iti Pramana Patavaha Karte iti Nayyayikaha Arhannityatha Jaina Shasana Rataha Karmeti Mimamsakaha Soyam Vo Vidadhatu Vanchitaparam Trailokyanatho Harihi. So it is but a single Lord that is pursued by all these various streams that go to the same sea, namely the Supreme Lord. And therefore, all these have a common goal, and they are not to be seen as always conflicting with one another. We have right in front of us the source of inspiration of this institution, namely Adi Sankara himself, who was called Shanmata Sthapanacharya, one who established six matas. And he is also the one who is said to have promulgated Panchayatana Puja. So where we have 5 divinities worshipped, sometimes with one as the central deity and sometimes with the other as the central deity. So we say Adityam, Ambikam, Vishnum, Gananatham, Maheshwaram. So one of these can become the central deity and the others can become Parivara Devatas of this very deity. So Aditya is the Sun Lord, Ambika is the goddess Shakti, Vishnu, Gananatha and Maheshwara. Any one of these can be the central deity, and the other deities become somewhat subordinate to this deity, the central one. So it is against this background that you must also try to assess the role of Veerashaivism and its contribution to humanity. Starting at a very ordinary, mundane, social level, we see that we have frequent conflicts on account of our bloated ego. So A simple solution towards this problem is the high goal of utter politeness that conduces to peace. Says the famous founder of Virashaiva faith, namely Basava. He says, Ayya endode swarga, Yelavo endode naraka. So addressing someone as Ayya is a Kannada form of Arya. So it's a respectful address. It's verily heaven. And addressing as Elavo, it's a disrespectful address, is really hell. Other moral precepts such as lust not after another's wife or after another's riches are stressed in many vachanas of the Virashaiva saints. For example, one saint says, Paranariya Tarayim Bho, Paradhanadamishava Tarayim Bho. So, lust not after another's wife or another's riches. Similarly, evil inclinations such as stealing and killing, speaking untruth, becoming wrathful, having contempt towards others, and the twin inclinations of self-praise and condemnation of others are all prohibited in another famous vachana, once again attributed to Basava, who says, Kalabeda, Kolabeda, Husiya Nudiyalu Beda, Muniya Beda, Anyarige Asahya Padabeda, Tanna Bannisa Beda, Idira Haliyalu Beda. Again, the condemnation of violence is made prominent by stating in a positive manner that there can be no dharma righteousness without a place for mercy. Says another famous vachana, Daya villada dharma vavudaya. In reality, Daya or mercy itself should be properly proportioned. It should not be applied out of place. It is not a very universal virtue to be practiced. So even though Daya is mentioned as the very first among the 8 Atmagunas by Gautama in his Dharma Sutra, it is yet not proper to elevate any single one of these Atmagunas to a supreme position so as to eclipse the very fundamental basis, namely Dharma itself. Dharma is at the basis and Daya and others are offshoots of Dharma. So in the yogic path we have what are called the 4 Brahma Viharas as referred to by Gautama the Buddha. So where we have Maitri, Karuna, Mudita and Upeksha as the supreme merits of the self. Now the need of the entire Bhagavad-Gita is the context of misplaced Daya. So in fact Yamuna says Asthana Sneha Karunya. So the entire Bhagavad-Gita was necessitated by the asthana or misplaced sneha and karunya of Arjuna towards those who are his very atatayins, persons who are all set to slay him. And with regard to such persons, Arjuna is trying to show pity and compassion, which is totally unwarranted and uncalled for. And therefore, Daya is not to be practiced at all costs and at all times, but it has also its own place and time and method. And yet, in order to emphasize the supreme quality of Daya, the vachana of one of the Virashaiva saints says, Daya villada dharma vavudaya. Which dharma can there be sans mercy? Now, obviously, none of these merits that have been so far enunciated are peculiar or special to the Virashaiva approach. All these have been enunciated by the earlier literature in Sanskrit through the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, the epics and the Puranas and the Upanishads and the Vedic literature. So this particular aspect of the emphasis of Daya as one of the supreme virtues has its origin in the Vedic, in the Upanishadic statement or in the statement of the Mahabharata which says Ahimsa Paramo Dharmaha. So it is the supreme dharma. So this message attains a very great relevance today in an age given to dastardly acts of violence, with, unfortunately, one of the chief religions of the world today, Islam, as the epicenter, whereas, ironically, the literal sense of Islam is peace. So, we find something very contrary to what it styles itself. One may also recall here that sometimes dharma is spoken of as but a set of 10 cardinal virtues, says Manusmriti, dhritihi, kshama, damosteyam, shaucham, indriya nigraha, dhir vidya, satyam akrodhaha, dashakam, dharma lakshanam. So all these are spoken of as the embodiment of dharma. In Veerashaivic texts, there are very strict regulations. For example, Parameshwara Agama says that the person who wears the linga, that is the Veerashaiva aspirant, he is asked to refrain from drinking wine and eating flesh. Na mamsam bhakshaye lingi na pyapeyam pibet kvachit. He should never drink. So what should not be drunk, and so he must also eschew consuming flesh. So we find that all these, all the systems of Indian philosophy or the various matas, so all have certain points of common emphasis, which is why Rajiv Malhotra, a modern thinker, so who has thrown a lot of light on the uniqueness of Hinduism and the Indian, what he calls it, the dharmic philosophies. He shows that Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism and Sikhism all have certain cardinal virtues and common principles as against the Western ones, which try to impose a certain kind of uniformity upon all others, and they are out to destroy all other systems in the world. And that is why a good many Indologists who owe their origin to the West have always striven to drive a schism between, for example, the Vedas on the one hand and all other texts on the other. Now, in the past 20 years, you can see that all the religions in India, all the small ones, or small traditions, so what are called the great traditions and the little traditions have all been pitted against the Vedic tradition in a totally unwarranted manner. It's only to drive a wedge in the Hindu society and to break them into numerous traditions. Now, the common complaint made by the West is that Hinduism is polytheistic, whereas the Vedic statement clearly goes against that. The Rig Veda itself says, Ekam Sat Vipraha Bahudha Vadanti. Truth is but one. And men of wisdom describe it variously. So this is hinted at in the Veerashaiva system also. Says Basava Devanobba Nama Halavu. God is but one and is called variously. So the system of dana, that is one of the cardinal virtues of Hinduism, is also emphasized in the Veerashaiva system. So we have the Upanishadic statement, Isha Vasyamidam Sarvam Yatkincha Jagatyam Jagat Tena Tyaktena Bhunjitaha Ma Gradhaha Kasyasvit Dhanam. All of this is enveloped by the Lord of this world. Enjoy therefore what has been dowered upon you by Him. Lust not after riches, whose after all is wealth, asked this Upanishad. Now, our Veerashaiva saints would have it like this. Ile nimma dana. So nimma referring to the Lord. So ile means the earth. Ile nimma dana. Bele nimma dana. Sulidu bisuva gali nimma dana. Kaya nimma dana. Jiva nimma dana. So all these, the earth, O Lord, is your gift. The harvest is your gift. The breeze that wafts gently is your gift. My body is your gift. My very self is your gift, O Lord. Giving an account of the genesis of the world. So, yet another Upanishad works out the idea. So, in the Taittiriya you have Tasmadva etasmad atmana akasha sambhutaha akasha dvayuhu vayo ragnihi agne rapaha adhya prithvi prithivibhya oshadheya prithivya oshadheya oshadibhyo annam annat purushaha. So, from the self arose ether, from ether arose wind, from wind arose fire, from fire the waters, from waters the earth, from the earth the herbs, from herbs the food, and from food the man. This idea repeats itself in the Vachana of Tontada Siddhalingesha. So he says, Atmanindadudu Akasha, Akashanindadudu Vayu, Vayuvinindadudu Agni, Agniindadudu Appu, Appunindadudu Prithvi, Prithviyum in Dadudu Sakala Jiva Vella. To translate, from the self originated ether, from the ether the wind, from the wind the fire, from fire the waters, from waters the earth, from earth all creatures. It is significant that the text betrays high fidelity to the original. So, in fact, he could have used jala for up, but he retains the word up because the Upanishad has the word up. And thus, we find that the Virshaiva texts, a good many of them, betray high fidelity to the original source. So, it is also very clear that the Bhagavad-Gita also has inspired a good many vachanas of the Virshaiva saints. Take for example this statement of the Bhagavad-Gita which says, Mai sarvamidam protam sutre maniganaha iva. All of this creation is reposed, so as are rows of beads in a thread. Says, Devara Dasimaya. He can see how his words reflect the very words of the Bhagavad-Gita. He says, Manigala Sutradante Trinayana Ninappayaya Enisuvade Tanu Bhinna Atmanobbane Anurenu Madhyadali Gunabharita Ninendu Manivutippenaya Ramanatha. To translate, O Shiva, literally triple-eyed, thou art as the string of the beads. The bodies, should one reckon, are different, yet the self, but unitary. Thou art the one, endowed with attributes amidst atoms and particles of dust. I keep prostrating before thee, O Ramanatha. So translate is by myself. That the Lord courses through all creation is plainly stated here, differing not in the slightest extent from the spirit of the original. Similarly, many of the precepts in, for example, one more from Bhagavad-Gita. The Bhagavad-Gita says, Yoga Karma Sukaushalam, and the Kannada version of that is Kayakave Kailasa. So, proper work, proper service leads one to the abode of Lord Shiva, namely Kailasa. So, it's not the case that the Virshaiva saints have fought shy of betraying the sources of their utterances. Now, if you look into the Wikipedia entry on, say, Virshaivism or Lingayata movement, okay, you can find that the entry there is utterly misleading. It opens with the statement that Virshaivism is Avaidika and Ahindu. So, that is the way the Wikipedia is describing. What about the Virshaiva saints? They themselves say that we owe our ideas to the Vedas. They themselves openly declare. And what is the point? So, it's all as a consequence of the colonialism of the West that we have tried to see everything Indian from a totally Western perspective and have begun to see divisions and schisms where they do not really exist. So, all the dharmic religions have a common undercurrent and the final goal of the attainment of dharma, whereas every Westerner has tried to see the diversity that obtains in this land as nothing but, in fact, the recent developments have been. So, there have been publications from Oxford University which say that there is nothing called Hinduism. Okay, this is only a modern construct. The Britishers wanted to give some name and label to the hundreds of local religions here, and they gave one brand name Hinduism. But actually there is nothing called Hinduism. All that obtains in this land is a multitude and a congregation of utterly disparate and totally contradictory approaches to life. And therefore there is no single theme called Hinduism. So this is what's happening in academic circles. So if a Christian missionary wrote like this, it is different. So you can give some margin. After all, they want to convert the entire universe into one fold. But this is the kind of thing that is happening in academic circles, and this certainly has to bother one. And therefore, you can see that the statement of a saint called Urilinga Pedda. So he describes the linga, so held in highest reverence among the Virshaivas as the most revered by way of deploying the self-same Sanskrit expressions as obtained in the Vedas, in the Upanishads, in the Gita, or even the Sanskrit saints. Now look at his statement, I quote from him. So they have never felt shy of interspersing their vachanas with actual utterances from the Vedas. He says, this is not Sanskrit, this is Kannada. ಯಥೋ ವಾಚೋ ನಿವರ್ತಂತೆ ಅಪ್ರಾಪ್ಯ ಮನಸಾ ಸಹ ಎಂದೆನಿಸುವ ಲಿಂಗವು, ಅತ್ಯತಿಷ್ಠದ್ದಶಾಂಗುಲಂ ಎಂದೆನಿಸುವ ಲಿಂಗವು, ಚಕಿತಮಭಿಧತ್ತೆ ಎಂದೆನಿಸುವ ಲಿಂಗವು, ಅಯಂ ಮೇ ಹಸ್ತೋ ಭಗವಾನ್ ಅಯಂ ಮೇ ಭಗವತ್ತರಃ ಎಂದೆನಿಸುವ ಲಿಂಗವು, ಎನ್ನ ಕರಸ್ಥಲಕ್ಕೆ ಬಂದು ಕರತಲಾಮಲಕದಂತೆ ತೋರುತ್ತಿದ್ದಾನೆ ಉರುಳಿಂಗಿ ಪೆದ್ದ ಪ್ರಿಯ ವಿಶ್ವೇಶ್ವರ. To translate, coming into my hand, the linga appears as clear as the berry in the palms, so as Hastamalaka. That linga of which one feels, yato vacho nivartante aprapya manasasaha. You can see that this is a direct borrowal from Taittiriya Upanishad 2.4.1, and of which one feels Atitishtat Dashangulam is from Rigveda 10.91. Chakitam Abhidatte Shrutirapi is from Pushpadanta's Shiva Mahimna Stotra. Ayam me hasto Bhagavan is from Taittiriya Aranyaka. Of the Sanskrit citations, the first one, Yato Vacho Nivartante, means whence recoils speech along with the mind, unable to reach. So you can find that, Atitishta Dashangulam is from Purusha Sukta. So thus we find that the Virshaiva saints are themselves never ashamed of quoting their Vedic and Upanishadic sources, whereas all the modern day describers of Virshaiva cult, they want to refer to it as a rebel against Hinduism, whereas it has never showed any sign of this kind of rebellion. And in modern times, there has been a revision of the colonialist views, and one professor, Balagangadhar from Ghent University, has shown that utterances which appear somewhat rebellious constitute less than 2% of the entire Virshaiva literature. So, and that kind of protest has been there, for example, against Brahmins. So, is there even in the Mahabharata. So, in fact, Anand Kumar Swami has pointed out in his marvelous work, Hinduism and Buddhism. He says, the more superficial one's study of Hinduism and Buddhism is, the more the contradictions one sees between the two. The more one goes deeper and deeper, the less different the two appear. Now, he, for example, cites Rice David. So, the David's couple are the ones who are held as a supreme authority in Buddhism. They have this polytext society in England, and they have brought out numerous polytexts in the original and with English translations. And in one of the books, Rice Davids makes this comment that the originality of the Buddha lies in the statement that he says that the yajna that he performs is not the external one, but an internal yajna. And Ananda Kumar Swami has brought out numerous passages from the Vedas and the Upanishads, where also it is very clearly stated that the yajna that is performed outside is after all a representation of the yajna that is performed inside. And therefore he says that even here the Buddhist scholars have not checked with their Vedic originals, and Buddhist scholars who have not studied the Vedas are unable to interpret Buddhist texts themselves. In fact, there is one article by Ananda Kumar Swami, which says, the title of which is Some Pali Words. This article, Some Pali Words, is a 60-page review of the Pali dictionary, so produced by the David's couple from United Kingdom. So, regarding many words that Kumar Swami points out where their translation and treatment has been inadequate. So here, Ananda Kumar Swami is criticizing a dictionary. So, for writing which, the two scholars, the David's couple, have spent their very lifetime. Okay, he says that their interpretation is incomplete and wanting in numerous places, precisely because they are not thorough with the metaphysics of Buddhism, and for an understanding of which a knowledge of the Vedas is supremely important. So, this is a criticism of a dictionary run into 60 pages. It's called a review article. So, in that review article, he shows how a lack of proper understanding of the Vedas and the Upanishads makes one incompetent to understand and interpret Buddhism itself, because Buddhism has freely drawn and borrowed from the Vedic and the Upanishadic traditions. So we can find that the Virshaiva saints themselves have never tried to say that, see, they are deviants from the Vedic, tradition. Of course, like every branch of Hinduism, Virshaiva also claims a hoary antiquity, says Shrikara Bhashya, Agastya Mukhachandrena Kritam Vayasikim Shubham Sutravrittim Samalokya Kritam Bhashyam Shivankaram. So this Shrikara Bhashya has its origin from Agastya. Now, this is comparable to the Brahmasutra Bhashya of, say, Ramanuja, where also he traces his origin to, say, Bodhayana. Bhagavad-Bodhayana Kritam Vistirnam Brahmasutra Vrittim Purvacharyaha Sanchikshipuhu Tanmatanusarena Sutraksharana Vyakhyasyanti. So, the same is the case with Shankara or Madhva or others who all say that their interpretation, their school of thought belongs to a hoary antiquity. Now, many of the Virshaiva utterances remind us of many Hindu stotras also. Take, for example, the Vishnu Shatpadi stotra of Shankara. He says, Satyapi bheda pagame natha tavaham namamaki nastvam samudro hi tarangaha kvachana samudro na tarangaha. So, even when all differences and distinctions are blotted out and erased, O Lord, I am yours, I cannot call you mine. Just as the wave can be said to belong to the ocean, and not the other way, that the ocean belongs to the wave. And look at the Virshaiva source which says, Yadyapi bheda pagame sambatavaham namamaki nastvam samudro hi tarangah kvachana natarango hi samudraha. Here, only some two words have been interchanged, and instead of the Lord is being referred to as merely Natha, we have the word Samba here. So, there is no other change here. The Advaitic notions, have been referred to here in Siddhanta Shikhamani. It is said, Tvanta hanta vinirmukte nirvikalpe chidambare eki bhutasya siddhasya bhava bhava katha kutaha. So, once again, an obliteration of all differences is emphasized here, and therefore, there are points where Virshaivism approaches either Vishishtadvaita or Advaita. So, it oscillates between these two traditions. Now, the principle of surrender that is emphasized in Vishishtadvaita is emphasized in the Siddhanta Shikhamani, a Virshaiva text which says, Sharanya sarvabhutanam shankara shashishekaraha sarvatmana prapannastam sharanagata uchyate prapanna parijatasya shivasya paramatmanaha prapatya kinna jayeta papinam api dehinam. I'll finish in 5 minutes, man. So, I know time is running out. I will not go into the translation of these texts, assuming that the audience knows a good deal of Sanskrit. The Virshaiva texts freely borrow not merely the Vedic and the Upanishads. So, they borrow from Kundalini Yoga also. Consider, for example, this statement of Sarpabhushana Shivayogi, which is a reflection of the yogic text. Saushumna randhadi turi, dhare gadi yuri, selilavahari, dahanani geri, murutana miri, gaganada tori, brahmada seri, amritava piri, sukhisua yoga marga, niryoga doliha, shiva yogige namisuven. So, in this vachana, he is describing what is described in all the yogic texts. To translate from Kannada, penetrating first through the orifice of Sushumna or Canalis Centralis. He presses his feet on the earth, leaps the water, ascends into the fire, transcends the wind. He appears in the ether, unites with Brahman, and sucks the nectar. No testimony is needed for the Hindu nature of Virshaivism other than these. And in fact, Shrikara Bhashya goes to the extent of saying that all Shrutis are harmonized only in Virshaiva. They say, we have achieved that better than Advaitins have done, better than Vishishtadvaitins have done. Dvaitadvaita mate shuddhe, Visheshadvaita samjnake. Visheshadvaita is Vishishtadvaita. Virashaivaika Siddhante Sarvashruti Samanmaya. So all the Shrutis have been brought into harmony because there are Dvaita Shrutis and Advaita Shrutis and Ghataka Shrutis. So all these have been harmonized best in Virashaiva, not in any other system. So this is the kind of approach that they have, and look at the modern interpreters of Virashaivism saying that it is totally anti-Vedic and non-Hindu approach. And the kind of universal munificence that we must cultivate is expressed in Kurma Purana, which is emphasized in Virashaiva philosophy very much. He says, who is a true Sharana? Sarvabhaya Pradhanancha Sarvanugrahanam Tatha Sarvopakara Karanam Shivasya Aradhanam Viduhu. What is Shiva's Aradhana? So the honoring of the propitiation of Shiva. Sarvabhaya Pradhanam, bestow fearlessness on all. Sarvanugrahanam Tatha, confer favors on all. Sarvopakara Karanam, be benefactor to all. So in order to facilitate an attitude of generosity, regulations pertaining to birth or jati have been slackened. And as in Buddhism, one is supposed to lose his earlier label the moment one enters the order. Once again, to quote from Siddhanta Shikhamani, Shivabhakti Samaveshe Kvajati Parikalpana Indhane Shvagni Dagdheshu Kova Bheda Prakirtyati. When Shivabhakti Samaveshe Kvajati Parikalpana, he says, when a person is suffused with devotion to Lord Shiva, all consciousness of one's caste simply disappears. Shiva Bhakti Samaveshe Kvajati Parikalpana Indhane Shvagni Dagdheshu Kova Bheda Prakirtyati. It is quite akin to what the Buddha was saying. So once a person enters the order, so he loses all his earlier identity and so on. And the Virashaiva text quote from many Sanskrit texts, for example, from Sutta Samhita, we get this quotation, Liyanal lingamityahuhu apare vedavittamaha tathapi lingam bhagavan swayameva maheshwaraha. So the linga is identified as the very embodiment of Trimurtis. So in another Virashaiva text called Pranatoshini, it is said, Mule Brahma vasati bhagavan madhya bhage cha vishnuhu agre shambhuhu, and so on. So we see that the linga is shown as the very embodiment of the trinity of divinities. And it can happen, everywhere, that whenever a good system comes, after some times, there will be an inordinate emphasis on form and some less emphasis on content, and therefore that system gets somewhat fossilized and can itself turn oppressive, when in turn another subsect will have to arise and rectify and restore stability and balance. So to claim that Virashaivism is a non-Hindu philosophy is saying like, Ramakrishna's philosophy is once again non-Hindu or anti-Hindu. It is as stupid as that. Now, in order to gauge the senselessness of this claim, one has only to look into the statement of Shripati Pandita, who says, Shivat Tvaddasa Dasoyaha Taddasosmiti Ya Sudhihi Tam Dattva Kripaya Pahi Janma Janmantareshu Mam. In the Wikipedia entry, it is clearly stated that Virashaivism does not believe in rebirth. But look at this statement of Shripati Pandita, who says, Janma Janmantareshu, in each and every birth of mine, Shivat Taddasa Dasoyaha Taddasosmiti Ya Sudhihi Tan Dattva Kripaya Pahi. My Lord, so save me by giving me this feeling in each and every birth of mine. Thus we can find that the modern entries in the Wikipedia are totally inauthentic. The persons who have contributed there have not looked into the original sources at all, and this overriding feeling of trying to pit every local tradition as being against the mainstream tradition of the Vedic and the Upanishad has become a sort of a fashion, and this all tries to bring into social disharmony. Now, I'll conclude this one excellent statement from a Virashaivic text. In fact, this is from Basava himself. Now, he says, he ejaculates, look at the concatenation of Vedic statements in this Vachana of Basava. He says, Somaf Pavate Yembashruti Anaritu, Shivaneko Rudran Advitiya Nendu Nambuvudu Kaniranna, ಭರ್ಗೋ ದೇವಸ್ಯ ಧೀಮಹಿ ಎಂಬುದಾಗಿ ಕೂಡಲ ಸಂಗಮನಲ್ಲದಿಲ್ಲದೆಂದುದು ವೇದ. ಓಂ ದ್ಯಾವಾ ಭೂಮಿ ಜನಯನ್ ದೇವ ಏಕಃ ಏಕೋ ಹಿ ರುದ್ರೋ ನ ದ್ವಿತೀಯಾಯತಸ್ಥು ಎಂದು ನಂಬಿರುವುದು ಕಾಣಿರಣ್ಣ. ಚಕಿತಮಭಿಧತ್ತೆ ಎಂದು ಶ್ರುತಿ ಸಾರುತ್ತೈದಾವೆ. ಶ್ರುತಿರತಿ ಶಿರದ ಮೇಲೆ ಅತ್ಯತಿಷ್ಠದ್ ದಶಾಂಗುಲನ ನಾನೇನೆಂಬನೆಯ್ಯ. ಘನಕ್ಕೆ ಘನಮಹಿಮನ ಮನಕ್ಕಗೋಚರಣ ಅಣೋರಣೀಯಾನ್ ಮಹತೋ ಮಹೀಯನ ಮಹದಾನಿ ಕೂಡಲ ಸಂಗಮ ದೇವನ. ವಿಶ್ವತೋ ಚಕ್ಷು ನೀನೇ ದೇವ, ವಿಶ್ವತೋ ಮುಖ ನೀನೇ ದೇವ, ವಿಶ್ವತೋ ಬಾಹು ನೀನೇ ದೇವ, ಕೂಡಲ ಸಂಗಮ ದೇವ. So here I can trace all these original quotations. Soma Pavate, I have traced it to Shatapatha Brahmana 4.2.2.12. Eko Devaha Rudraha Advitiya Shvetashvatara Upanishad 3.2. Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi from the famous Gayatri Mantra Rigveda 3.62.10. Om Dyava Bhumi Janayan Deva Ekaha Rigveda 10.81.3. Eko hi Rudro Nadvitiyayathastuhu. Once again Shvetashvatara Upanishad 3.2. Chakitam Abhidatte from the Pushpadanta Atyatishthad Dashangulam Rigveda 10.91. Anoraniyan Mahatomahiyan from Kathopanishad 2.20. or even the Bhagavad-Gita Vishwato Chakshu Vishwato Mukha Vishwato Bahu from Mahanarayana Upanishad 2.2. The passage does not attempt even to paraphrase Vedic statements, unable to resist the temptation of quoting the Vedic texts verbatim. So, fearing elsewise that the import in the spirit of the original may be lost. So, such is the fidelity of the Virashaiva saints to the Vedic and the Upanishadic traditions. And therefore, to brand Virashaivism as a rebel against Hinduism is the height of stupidity. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Professor Kannan.
Thank you, Dr. Kannan. It's a really well thought, well contemplated paper. The point which I would like to highlight here in his paper is that, and that also partially answers the questions raised by Father Matthew, that we have to go to the original. This is the outcome of not going to the original. The confusion that has been created and the general impression, people work on general impressions and without go to the text, and so real intention of the text is not understood, and therefore you start constructing your intentions and start that constructed intention reading in those texts. So this is a very, very good point that you have pointed, and therefore that was the purpose behind this event also. We wanted to present the position of each and every philosophical system, but without tempering with the original text. So we must refer whatever interpretations may be yours, but we should know that which text you are interpreting. So that references must be the guiding factor. As regards the point that Father has raised, yesterday again I could go back to Nagasampige. Now he was giving a metaphor of a ladder, Sopana Karma. That is a wonderful metaphor that he has used. You see, it is not true that there was no tensions in the society. Society had tensions, but how to solve those tensions? You have to take into account the reason for the tension and correct it to the next stage of philosophization. And for Shankara, Maya is not understandable, remove Maya. And then come out with Shuddhadvaita. So there is no scope of any Maya. You can see? Then again now come to this. That all the tensions now include everything there, and those who are telling that no, you do not belong to Vedic tradition, then quoting the passages from Vedic tradition, and then show that we also in the same stream. So this kind of an attempt to seeing unity in diversity has been the constant process in our tradition, right from the Vedic times. So it is not the case that they were not concerned about what is happening in the society. They were reflecting. It's a reflecting tradition, I tell you. Had not there been this kind of reflections, you would not have got so many systems of philosophy. Then it would have been only one philosophy. And the very fact that there are various kinds of systems of philosophy is a proof that our traditions have been reflecting tradition, and everyone, and they all are guided by some kind of a problem in the society, and to solve those kind of a problems, this kind of a theorization and philosophizations of those problems have taken place. So we have to think. As regards your repentance, I mean, the Prayaschitta is a constituent ritual. Each and everything that we do, even Sandhya Vandana, you don't know, at the end we say, oh God, please forgive me. Whatever wrong I have done mentally, through my words, through my actions, all that I have done, please forgive me. One beautiful point that Father has made, that is to be noted. All these thinking universally and an idea of oneness actually was emphasized in the Bhakti tradition. And it is that reason that even Shankara could not avoid that if you want moksha, you cannot ignore Bhakti. Bhakti is surrender. It's a method of thinking yourself humble, small, humble. So this humility, the sense of humility, a sense of a service, that has given rise to the sense of a service to the Lord. And if the Lord is what all around me, then service to all around me is service to God. So therefore, Naranarayana, this kind of a... So this is how the development has taken. So, Father, there is no parallel to this kind of a tradition. It's a reflecting tradition. You will not find such a tradition anywhere in the globe. So this is a unique tradition. You will agree that there is no parallel to this kind of a tradition. Let us keep this tradition reflecting tradition all along. And so whatever vices will come, whatever wrong will come in the society, we are capable of solving those problems through reflections. Because reflections alone will bring us to rationality, and which will help us to come over emotionality. It is emotions which create problems and not the rationality. Thank you very much.
I take this privilege of chairing this wonderful session of the final day of this conference, where 3 papers bring us 3 different outlooks on universal education and spirituality as well. In the first paper, Professor S.D. Talwar practically demonstrated the theories of Raja Yoga, which has been very elaborately illustrated through his presentation. And Raja Yoga has not been discussed as much as I remember in any other paper in this conference. In the second paper, Brahmacharini Purvi, she again reiterated her presentation about how to get over the problem of loss of memory, how to initiate children to get their memory in such a way that they can develop their inner abilities, inner capabilities at the maximum. Thanks for this reiteration. And in the last paper, Professor K.S. Kannan, he spoke on Virashaivism, but at the same time with a very large perspective which brought to us about what really Hinduism is. Hinduism embraces all kinds of theories, practices, purviews, previews, individual experiences, and mass experiences. That's the greatness of this tradition. One thing I'll just like to refer here, that in Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, Shankaracharya himself has quoted in his Bhashya, has illustrated who the Asuras are. And there he put it firstly in etymologically as Asu Karmani plus Ra Pratyaya. That is, who Asuras are those who emphasize only on karma, only on kriya, and goes for their individual pleasure. Those are called Asuras. And Shankaracharya himself again describes there that even the human being who are prone to activities that give them individual pleasure, material pleasures only, goes to this class. And when they can help themselves to surpass from this arena of Kriya to self-realization for what they are doing, when they can drag them up from this realm, it's only then that they can acquire Devatva or Suratva, which is not Asuratva. I request you all to go through those sections in Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Thank you all for your patient hearing and your scholarly comments on this session.